Hi, I'm Julia Crummy and I am here from the British Geological Survey to talk to you a little bit about some development we've been doing of the BGS SIGMA system to create a toolkit for the collection of pre- and post-disaster data. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about what BGS SIGMA is, as I can imagine that a lot of you might not know and might not be familiar with the system. And then I'll talk about some of the modules that we've developed that we've packaged as a toolkit for disaster risk reduction, which includes a building characteristics module and a damage and impact data collection module. And then I will just talk a little bit about what the next steps are really for us with this development. So BGS SIGMA is the British Geological Survey system for integrated geoscience mapping. And it was a digital field data collection system developed basically to sort of replace traditional geological mapping methods of paper notebooks and maps. And the idea is that geologists go into the field with their ruggedized tablet or laptop, and they can collect data directly in a GIS, and data are all stored in a relational database linked to a single point for each location in the GIS. So observations are collected, there's no limit to the number of observations, and observations can be photographs, you can annotate photographs, they can be sketches, samples, measurements, comments, anything at all really. It's created in ArcGIS and it's an add-on. So for anyone who has an ArcGIS license, this can just be a free add-on that can be downloaded from the BGS website. And this is just an example of the sort of user interface. Here in the field I've mapped a point. And this brings up a switchboard and it automatically timestamps the point with the date and the time and with the user ID so that you know who's recorded the data, along with an easting and a northing. And then you have the ability to add in a locality description and then select any of these to make any measurements. So I've selected the photo option here. And you can have any number of photos with a facing direction for the photo and a description, and these can be annotated as well. But it's quite a powerful tool for data collection in the field, and because it's done on a ruggedized laptop, you don't need to have a separate camera. You can just take photographs, or a ruggedized tablet. You can just take photographs with that tablet, and it's all in there and linked. But the other thing is because it's a GIS, then you can store and preload existing sort of georeference data sets. And you can use things like satellite imagery or any kind of infrastructure maps or hazard maps or anything really that can help. So I started sort of conversations with colleagues across BGS a few years ago about what the kind of possibilities are of developing this kind of field data collection tool and system beyond just your kind of traditional mapping and what we can do. And we kind of came up with a toolkit of modules for pre- and post-disaster data collection. And this is really because my background is in volcanology and in explosive volcanic eruptions and tephra fall deposits and the sort of hazard assessment of those tephra fall deposits. And I'm really interested in the impacts of volcanic events and the sort of vulnerability of buildings to volcanic hazards. And so I've sort of come at it from that point of view, and I'm working with a colleague who's interested in landslide hazard, another colleague who's interested in sort of cultural heritage of buildings. And so we kind of came up with these modules of a building characteristics data collection model, one specifically for built cultural assets, and a post-disaster data collection tool for collecting the damage and impact data. And so the building characteristics module records really anything about a building, about the construction material and usage of a building. So these three photographs are just from Ethiopia, where I'm working, showing different types of buildings that we see in Ethiopia. So in rural areas, we have these traditional circular grass sort of thatch roofed buildings. In many places, these are being replaced by rectangular shaped, long span roofed, corrugated iron roofed buildings. But in slightly more urban areas, we have these kind of multi-rise buildings. So 3 very different buildings, each with probably very different vulnerabilities, potential vulnerabilities to different hazards. So the idea is that somebody could go in and just do an assessment of the types of buildings in a village or in an area surrounding a volcano or in an area where there are potential for other hazards. And they can kind of do a bit of an ad hoc vulnerability assessment or analysis of where sort of the more vulnerable buildings might be. So we've created a prototype for the building characteristics module. So this is the front end when you create your point. And again, you have the date and time stamp to your easting and northing, and then a description you can enter. And we've got this building assessment tool or table, and that opens up this form where you can collect information about the building, anything about the age, its footprint, the number of stories, the condition of the building. And then to these you can then attach and collect information about each element of the building. So for example, thinking about the walls, what the construction materials are of the walls, what the support system is, and what the condition of that is and the quality of that. There's also the possibility to record primary elements and secondary elements. So if we have one part of the building, the main part of the building might be reinforced concrete, and then there might be a sort of wooden lean-to extension or a shed or something on the side of it. And you have that ability to record both the kind of primary and the secondary materials and construction and structure and things for those. So the second module we're looking at is built cultural assets. So these are places of worship, places where people express cultural identity, theatres, museums, that sort of thing, or any information centres. And these types of buildings can be really important in post-disaster recovery because they can provide places of shelter, they can provide evacuation centres if necessary, but they can also just provide a place where people can seek information and can just seek support in a post-disaster setting. And they are also can be targeted during conflict as a way of suppressing cultural identity. So it's important, I think, to have a record of the distribution of these buildings, of where they are, their function as they are now, their potential function in a post-disaster situation, and any kind of key characteristics of the built cultural assets. And then the third module we're looking at is the damage and impact data collection module. And this one is a lot more complex because we are looking at things like the type of hazard, the extent of the hazard, the different hazard intensities that can cause any damage and impact. So, and these can be really variable. So for example, if we're thinking about a volcanic environment, if there are pyroclastic density currents, then you have things like what the flow depth is, you have temperature, you have the dynamic pressure. All of these have different impacts on buildings, and it's really important to record them to be able to link the hazard intensity to the extent of the damage. We also need to be able to record the extent and the details of the damage. And at the moment, I'm just really talking about the physical damage to buildings, but I'm also, and we are also interested in impacts. So thinking about what the impacts are for critical infrastructure systems. So things like electricity networks, power networks, water networks, wastewater networks, communication networks, road systems, transport networks, anything that's sort of critical to communities, to the survival of communities. and how we kind of record that data and what data we can record that is useful. That's where I'd like to take it, I think, probably in the future is looking more at impacts and things like the displacement of people and what the impacts can be on people as well. And these are just some images from Montserrat, where BGS was there, and colleagues of mine collected damage and impact data. But we're also we're working with colleagues in Singapore, New Zealand, and we've sort of spoken to them about their experiences of collecting damage and impact data. We're very much doing this with people who have experienced this, so that we can try and make sure that what we want to record, or that we're creating a tool which is usable and is functional and works for what is needed, really. And I think that's obviously key to anything that we do. I'm very much talking about volcanic environments, partly because that's my background, but partly because volcanic environments are multi-hazard by nature. So around a volcano there can be any number of hazards. And so we get debris flows, so pyroclastic density currents, lahars, landslides, rockfalls. In times of unrest, we can have earthquakes associated with the movement of magma, with ground fracturing. And then there are hazards that are very specific to volcanoes, like tephra fall. But the point of that is that it means that when we create dictionaries for these, they can actually be quite easily adapted for other single and multi-hazard environments. And the other reason for looking at volcanic environments is the fact that they are multi-hazard. We very rarely just see a single hazard from a volcanic eruption. So we often get interrelated, concurrent, cascading and cumulative hazards. And the really kind of nice thing about the BGS SIGMA tool, and it's one of the reasons why I was really keen to kind of do this work and development for it, is because it's in a GIS. Users can revisit a site and just add timestamp data. So it enables that assessment of those cumulative impacts over time. They can revisit a site as many times in between events. For example, in between ashfall events, they can see the cumulative build-up of those events and what that damage is, and it allows that kind of dynamic assessment, which I think it sort of gives it quite good potential for what could be done with it in the future. And so just to sort of wrap up, really, users collect data directly into the GIS. It's all stored in a relational database, so all linked to that same point. That data, there's a report generating function, so you can just generate a report of all the data linked to that point. Where we are now with it is that we have developed a prototype for building characteristics data collection, and we're developing the proof of concept, and we're in the design, sort of developing the design for the damage and impact data collection tool, which is quite exciting. I think it's got a really kind of huge potential across all natural hazards by just being so easily kind of adaptable. And I think the really kind of key thing really is that it enables that collection and assessment of interrelated hazards and their cumulative impacts over time. So thank you very much, and I look forward to discussing some of this further. Thank you.